All right, I'm going to go ahead and kick things off. Welcome to Building Secure Networks with Zero Trust Strategies, a webinar presented by InterVision and Bridge Security Advisors. My name is Zach Moore. I am the Senior Product Manager over Cybersecurity at InterVision. I've been with the company for about 16 and a half years at this point. I've been subject matter expert over a number of technology silos, worked Tier 3 operationally over just about every technology we support. In recent years, I have led our SOC, and I have also been in the product development side working on our product services for cybersecurity. Recently, I've been focusing on developing around SSE and SASE and working on Zero Trust solution, which is what brings us here. So Paul, I'll kick it over to you to introduce yourself.
Thanks, Zack. Paul Donfried. I'm a partner and co-founder in Bridge Security Advisors and a great partner of InterVision. And I'm a cybersecurity professional, have focused on design for security and active security for the past 25, 30 years, and have recently focused on zero trust principles and network architecture and the changes that entails from traditional perimeter-based network control strategies. Thanks.
Excellent. All right, thanks. All right, so as far as what we're going to be talking about today, we're going to be diving into Zero Trust. We're going to be looking at it from a high level, an introduction, what it is, what it isn't. We're going to be trying to understand some of the main principles and what their importance is. We're going to be looking at some practical steps for implementation, some experts' insights and case studies of what we've been through, and then we're going to open it up to the floor for some questions. So without further ado, let's dive right in. So Zero Trust, what is it? To talk about what Zero Trust is, I'm first going to talk about what it isn't. It isn't a single product or technology or compliance standard that's out there. There are standards like NIST 800-207, which we're going to talk about in just a little while here, that are mapped around Zero Trust. Zero Trust has been around for longer than them. There are also some products out there like Zero Trust Network Access, which is one of the core components of Security Service Edge, which is part of SASE. But again, that is just a product that can help you to achieve some of the different principles within Zero Trust. It's not the framework itself. So Paul, I'll kick it over to you to talk a little bit about what is mainly involved in Zero Trust and what it means for customers to adopt it.
Thanks, Zack. And let me start with an analogy. So I was down in Texas with a client, and we were in a restaurant that had windows on two sides, giving great views outside. And we were at an interchange of two highways. So there were a lot of roads connecting and going back and forth. And we were talking about zero trust, and we were talking about how's this different than traditional networking, right? And we hit upon the analogy that it's kind of like those roads and those highways, right? And those are what we might think of as our traditional networks that we've set up with traffic controls, road signs, limited ingress, limited egress, limited access. And we now find ourselves in a world full of drones, right? And those drones don't use the roads. So they don't observe the road signs. They don't observe the traffic controls. They don't even observe property divisions, right? And it's like, okay, how in that world do we impose the same controls from a security perspective that we've traditionally tried to impose on the highways and the byways and the surface roads, right? And we've always had this paradigm that those roads we could trust because we built the trust into the design of the roads. The highway, you had limited access points you got on, you went through a toll booth, you had some checks, right? And then you exited at specific points. And we now live in a world where the number of things that are moving around, the velocity has increased so substantially, right? On the surface roads, we have a lot more traffic. And we now have all these other mobile things that don't conform to those same original topologies that we had. And so to me, that's what zero trust embodies, is in this new world where we can count on the existing controls, the existing highways and roads and conduits that we had to control this traffic. How is it that we approach those controls? And in the zero trust paradigm, part of the challenge is, on the one hand, it's utterly simple. In a zero trust world, all you care about are subjects and resources. This cargo needs to get to this workload, right? This subject needs to connect with this resource. And in the zero trust world, we implicitly do not have any confidence in the underlying transport, whether it's the surface roads or whether it's the air. And so we rely on intelligence at the edge, at the subject and at the resource, to be able to enforce policies and to be able to make policy decisions. Right. And on the one hand, that's a pretty simple change, right? We're going from this perimeter control scenario to one where all we care about are subjects and resources. And we make sure that we apply that intelligence at those edge points, right? And the points on this slide, denied by default, right? Yeah, so in this new world, it doesn't matter what's trying to make a request. You need to fully authenticate and authorize it without making any other underlying assumptions, right? And ideally, you want to do this in the most granular fashion you can. Right? We have some contemporary examples of that in cellular networks. Right? So we're able to drive down the highway at 60 miles an hour and go from one cell tower to another cell tower and maintain continuity of that session. But everything has to be authenticated in real time in order for that to work. Does our carrier having a roaming agreement with a new carrier, right? Does our policy allow us to connect through that kind of equipment? So we have models of how this can work, but in my mind, zero trust comes down to the world has changed in the last 5 years.
Mm-hmm.
Everybody's now remote working, right? So the remote worker use case is no longer an edge case, right? Now it applies to everybody. And in this world where we never know how you're going to connect, how is it that we create a secure environment and protect the privacy and the confidentiality of those communications?
Absolutely. Sum it up easily with never trust, always verify, and have that be the default. So,
100%.
moving on, let's talk a little bit about, I mentioned NIST 800-207 earlier. Zero Trust was here first, and NIST put together 807 or 800-207 to act as kind of their guidelines for how one might get there. You can get to Zero Trust without ever working within this standard, or you can use this standard to get to zero trust. But let's talk a little bit about some of the main principles within zero trust and what they look like from an importance standpoint, what they're doing for you. So treating all data and services as resources, you mentioned that earlier with all you've got is resources and connections, securing all that communication, no matter where it's coming from, whether it's your remote users at home or at client sites or in a coffee shop, whether it's your IoT devices that maybe have their own ingress and egress from your network and things like that. And then always granting access based on dynamic policies, the ability to automatically figure out what a resource is, who it's allowed to talk to, what that role-based access looks like, determining that access by client and identity behavior and all what environments it's in. So rather than just looking at traditional model of it is at this location, it is within my firewall, therefore I trust it to do everything. Now instead we're looking at what is this resource trying to access? How is it behaving? Where is it moving? what kind of identifiers are attached to that data and attached to those motions, and how do we verify it? And then, of course, anytime you've got such a granular and constant state of monitoring role-based access, you have to constantly monitor and assess what is going on. You have to look for those insights, and you have to look at all of that data and verification in motion, and then enforce your dynamic authorization and authentication policies against it. And then you have to gather and use that data to continuously refine what you're doing and continuously learn so that you can continue delivering a high degree of service. So, Paul, I'll kick it over to you. What does that look like from a practical standpoint?
Well, I think you hit on a key dimension of this, which is the dynamic authentication and authorization, right? And how do you make intelligent authorization decisions based on all of the contextual information that you have, right? And so I'll use two kind of analogies. One, when I think of NIST, right, the image that always pops into my head is when I'm putting gas in my car and there's that standards and weights seal on the pump, right? That's certified against a NIST standard. And so that's NIST's job, is to create these standards and these principles to help make commerce even and accessible, right? And so I think the 800 207 guidelines are brilliant, right? They talk about what are those principles that you're trying to drive towards with a zero trust network access and network architecture, right? And you mentioned one of them, the dynamic dimension of this, right? And I had an example, and probably everyone listening has had a similar example. Early on, when we started remote connecting our computers, I ended up out of the country in Austria, and I left my phone dialed into my modem, right? And I forgot to disconnect it, and I started getting called by AT&T, right? And the reason I started getting called is because they saw that as anomalous behavior, right? They understood my calling patterns, they understood who I called, how long I called them, etc. And all of a sudden they saw this extended international call from a place that I wasn't frequently in.
Mhm.
And they got concerned something awry was going on, right? And we now have the ability with AI technology, right, that's all around us, to apply that same kind of machine learning and intelligence to authentication, right? And so when we talk about authentication being enforced dynamically and authentication decisions relying on real-time information, right? That's how you tie in those new capabilities to ensure greater security in connecting subjects to resources, right? And the beginning of this, right, which is treat all data and services resources, that's it, right? And
Mhm.
you assume that whatever is in between those two, you can't trust, right? And so what do I need to do to ensure integrity between these two endpoints, the subject and the resource, right? And these principles are brilliant, right? Secure all communications, no matter the network, correct. So don't trust anything. You create an encrypted session, right? You do with dynamic keys, you do with the strongest encryption technology that you can. And wherever possible for authentication, you're using multi-factor authentication. And where it's possible to take advantage of the hardware identity of the device, you try and do that, right? And grant access per session, right? Ideally, you want to get even granular. You want to go down to the actual transaction level within sessions, right? Again, that's how mobile phones work, going from tower to tower. Right, so you want to apply the security at the most granular level that you possibly can, right? And when you're authenticating subjects in particular, you want to take advantage of all available information. Where are they right now? Where were they 5 minutes ago? Are they moving? What direction are they headed, right? Because in many cases, that information can be pertinent to making an authentication or an authorization decision. And so you want to
Yep,
be able to capture that first and foremost, but then you also want to be able to take advantage of it and process it when you're making the policy decision.
absolutely. And the more data you can gather on the movement of those resources and those behaviors, and the better you can monitor it and analyze it in real time, the fewer gaps there are. And the less chance there is versus a traditional network of a malicious actor or a malicious payload getting in and exploiting and moving laterally and things like that. And that's really the name of the game. So
Yep.
let's move along and let's talk about some practical steps for implementation. Viewers may be familiar with this image here. It is the Zero Trust Maturity Model. This is a common theme out there when people are having conversations around zero trust of what it looks like to move from some traditional controls and kind of a beginner level amongst all of the different things that you can implement for zero trust to what it looks like when you get up to an optimal level, when you're implementing the latest and greatest tools, techniques, and procedures, when you have the correct things in place to implement zero trust across all of your resources, including identity, your devices, your network, your applications, and your data in motion. So looking at this up at the top, you are going to see a lot more traditional controls, password policy, implementing multi-factor authentication, looking at device inventory and mapping your inventory to compliance standards, network segmentation, encryption, access authorization, and cloud access brokerage, looking at unencrypted data, taking that to an encrypted state, protecting data in motion, things like that. So as we move up the chain, move towards optimal, Paul, what do you think some of the more important things to prioritize for customers on their zero trust journey look like?
From our perspective, Zach, it should be use case driven, right? So
100%.
what are the business use cases that are driving zero trust? What is it you're trying to achieve from the business level? And then link that to the capability and the functionality that you need, right? Identity is critical. Identity, without a doubt, is the foundation of zero trust. And everything in a zero trust approach builds on your identity and access management foundation. So what discipline have you gone through in setting up your roles and your groups in AD? Right? Are those in fact driving your access control policies, right? Because ultimately you have a lot of incredible flexibility in zero trust and SASE solutions to implement very fine-grained access controls. But the key is you need to, one, have those organized so they're as simple to implement and operate as possible. And then secondly, you need to be able to maintain them over time, update them, change them, etc. And what we typically find is the IAM infrastructure that's already in a company is not very mature.
Mhm.
And so we end up having to help those organizations go through a process of maturing those controls and getting to the point where they have the appropriate fine-grained access controls that give them the segmentation and the security they're looking for, but they're simple to manage and operate.
Absolutely. And within you talked about use cases earlier, the use cases that customers are seeing. A lot of the conversation around zero trust and its incumbent technologies and policies is based heavily on security and the focus on security, which is a big part of what zero trust does. But a lot of the use cases for zero trust and the incumbent technologies are also based on productivity savings and increasing efficiency and things like that. For example, one of the big technologies under zero trust is Security Service Edge, part of the SASE suite. Um, just looking at analysts' analysis of different stacks of SSE. For example, when ESG did an analysis of Zscaler's SSE suite, one of the largest customers that they had that implemented it did see a major savings in risk reduction from security, but also saw an even larger increase in productivity. So actually the ROI from the productivity savings of implementing Zero Trust for customers on Zscaler was greater than the security risk reduction, as well as things like SSE and Zero Trust leading to things like 85% or greater reduction in ransomware. And then within what you do get hit by, reducing the ability for lateral spread. I think looking at Illumio, they have numbers such as 66% reduction in lateral transfer between resources when devices are hit, things like that. So from a practical standpoint, there are a lot of savings both within the productivity side as well as the security side for implementing zero trust and incumbent technologies and things like that within customer environments. So let's move on and
Great.
talk a
So
little.
yeah,
Yeah,
we see three big benefits there, right? To organizations. One, there is the productivity gain you talked about, right? And that productivity gain comes about through increased automation. You're having
absolutely.
machines do tasks that previously you needed human beings to do, right? The second big benefit we see is, in many cases, a reduction in licensing costs. You're getting rid of older technology that can be quite expensive, that can now be replaced by virtualized network functions that can kind of run on any commodity hardware, right? The third dimension we're seeing is this enables digital transformation. This allows companies to adopt and implement new technologies faster because it provides a more agile approach to doing that, right? So we're also finding there's a benefit to helping companies accelerate their digital transformation strategies.
Yeah, when everything is in the cloud and everything is dynamic and you've got predefined roles and policies, and all you need to do to plug in new devices and sites is just connect it up to the proper role for that resource. Um, Mergers and acquisitions and expansion and things like that become so much easier, so much faster, so much turnkey. All right, let's talk about some of these customer challenges and how they map to and are solved by Zero Trust.
Sure.
So,
So I'm sure everyone's familiar with the things we have at a high level here, right? And again, kind of the world has changed pretty dramatically over the last 5 to 10 years, right? We've had the advent of cloud computing, and in many regards, we went in a direction from mainframes to personal computers, and then we've now transitioned from personal computers back to cloud computing. And in many ways, that's bringing us back to the connected era of mainframes, where it's very difficult to do your job or your work in isolation. You need connectivity to those cloud services in order to be able to do your job, right? The second dimension, distributed users and applications. Everybody has to be able to work from anywhere now,
mhm.
right? And I guess the most dramatic example I saw of that, we were working with a refinery, right? A US refinery. They pump oil out of the ground and they refine it and they transport it. And every employee in that refinery has to be able to work remotely outside of the refinery at least 1 day a week, right? And if you think about the impact of that on your IT infrastructure and your IT organization, right? How do you do that? How do you literally let people work on sensitive equipment, things that can blow up and injure human beings remotely, and have the right security controls around it, right? And we found that zero trust was the only way to be able to deal with that, right? To be able to allow those people to continue to do their jobs remotely with this very stringent security requirement, right? But the point is, distributed users and applications, the world has changed. Now you need to be able to do your job from anywhere. And the employer needs to be able to support not only you being anywhere and doing your job, but you bringing your own device.
Absolutely.
You using a personal device, a personal laptop, a personal tablet, and then being able to support that.
And
Right?
here's that digital transformation again, talking about the transformation for Industry 4.0 and all cyber physical systems, securing IoT, and utilizing things like 4 and 5G and AI and machine learning to empower your business and your transformation. Take your network from the old standby of large CapEx devices that sit at physical locations to what ends up with Zero Trust being a very modular, cloud-based, quick adoption OpEx model, which moving from CapEx to OpEx is another attractive feature that a lot of businesses are seeing rather than doing large firewall refreshes every 3 to 5 years instead of just having that monthly cost that's based on usage and consumption and things like that. So
Right.
to be mindful of time for questions, we've got just a little over 3 minutes left here. So I am going to go ahead and open it up to the floor. Amanda, if you want to shoot anything we've got over, and Paul and I can answer to the best of our ability. So what is the first steps my organization should take if we're just now looking into Zero Trust? Paul, I'll hand this one to you first. What are your thoughts there?
I think start by defining those business use cases. What is it you're doing that's driving this, right? Is it part of a digital transformation? Is it part of dealing with a remote workforce? Is it empowering a connected worker? Right? But I think it starts with defining those business use cases. Then you can begin to plot a path.
Absolutely. It all comes down to outcomes. In the traditional network, it was all about just the table stakes of making sure that my resources can talk to each other. But Zero Trust and the technologies within it, SSE, and all of your IM technologies and things like that are so much more powerful and enable such a larger range of functions. You can go beyond just make sure that A can connect to B to improving digital experience, to improving productivity and reporting, to performance management and optimization, analytics cost savings, you know, dynamic pricing models if you are delivering services to other people, predictive demand forecasting, things like that. There's a whole bunch of different things that you can do within the Zero Trust space, use case driven. And you really need to just sit down and hash out up front, what do we want to do and how is it going to improve my business? Amanda, I think we got time maybe for one more question. We got about a minute left. Biggest pitfalls we should be aware of when pursuing Zero Trust. Probably the biggest one that comes to my mind would be thinking of it in terms of a single investment that I'm going to buy this product, I'm going to plug it in, and I'm going to be done. It's a framework, so there's a bunch of different technologies out there that can support it. You really need to identify your use cases. You need to be able to go out and do all those technology comparisons to identify what fills my needs, what gets me to where I need to go, and you really need to build a roadmap. Paul, I know that building that roadmap and developing those use cases is a primary focus of what Bridge does alongside InterVision. So I'd say if you need help, feel free to reach out to InterVision and we can arrange meetings and we can help you through this journey. So just real quick on the last few seconds here, we have a number of other events coming up aimed at different segments, aimed at different technologies. So Feel free to visit the InterVision.com website. Look for us at all these events, and we'd love to talk to you again. Thank you for your time.